Day one of Pats was today. You know, Deebo was back. It's just another day of 49ers news. I've got a great host with me today, Jessie Naylor of Last Second Sports. We're going to be breaking down all of training camp today, as well as the Deebo contract right after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on three. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What's going on, faithful? Thank you for tuning into a show. And real quick before we start, got to give a shout out to both John Stewart and Raphael 5629ers for tuning in. As I said, I've got a very special guest, Jessie. Jessie, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing fantastic. How appropriate that your intro ends with Deebo dancing a day after he signs. Pad work started today. It's a beautiful day to be a Niner fan for sure.
And the best part about it, who threw that pass? It was Mr. Number 5, Trey Lance. And how did practice start today? Deebo Samuel catching deep passes from Trey Lance during warmups. But before we get started with the football content, Amin the Dream coming in with a question for you. How was the water park with your sons today, Jessie?
It was good, man. A little burnt. We had a blast. It's always iffy. They're at that age where they're 9 and 8, and so you just never know like how adventurous they're going to be. They see a big water slide, are they willing to go down it, that type of thing. But they actually both tried everything and enjoyed them for the most part. So we had a blast.
That's perfect, man. And real quick, shout out to Jamal as well. Before we start with the 49ers content, be sure to subscribe to this channel as well as the 49ers RedZone podcast. We will be recording very soon after recording this weekend with the Deebo Samuel news. And that is a great place to start, Jessie. Deebo Samuel was re-signed this weekend with a 3-year deal, $71.55 million, up to $73.5 million. What was your initial thoughts when you saw the news of the contract?
Yeah, I think that, early on, I really expected there to be closer to 70 million guaranteed, but I also expected a 4-year deal, right? Mm-hmm. And so we got a little bit of a shorter deal, pretty much in line with what everybody else is getting. So to me, I mean, there was no surprise. Like everybody else had signed, we knew what the going rate was. And so I'm just happy that it ultimately got done. I think that Deebo himself, this was a great deal for him, because one of the things that I talked about during the early portion of the offseason is that Deebo's not the youngest receiver. He's 26 years old. And a lot of these other guys are getting their second deal around 24, 25 years old. And those extra years certainly make a difference. But for Deebo signing a short-term deal, that means he gets to hit free agency again when he's 29. And I think that's significant for Deebo, the player. But I also think that it was a great deal for the 49ers. I mean, a lot of fans talked about possible injury history. There was the questions about, does he come in shape all the time? And so now they get him short-term. And I think this is really a win-win for both the team and the player, and I'm excited that Deebo's back.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. I think that this was a win-win. When you talk about the 49ers and Deebo Samuel, I was a little bit surprised as well on the monetary value. I thought his average annual value would be a little higher, as well as the money guaranteed, especially after hearing reports that it could be up to $70 million in terms of guaranteed. But I think that overall, it's exactly what both sides wanted. Samuel wanted to get into the market sooner than later, especially with wide receiver decreasing as a premium position in the NFL and his age being already 26 years old and having to be locked up for the next 4 years on a contract. And I think the 49ers wanted to definitely decrease those values. And it's so interesting with the way it's structured, because it's not necessarily as high of a signing bonus helping them. Instead, it's a bunch of likely to be guaranteed money with a bunch of bonuses and incentives and things like that. So great deal for both sides, in my opinion. And I applaud the 49ers organization for getting it done in the way that it did.
Well, one thing, too, that I want to bring up, because this obviously has been going throughout the day, and I actually just found out like 2 hours ago of this situation because I was at the water park with my family and whatnot. But there are incentives in the deal that are based off the running side, which I find very interesting, because if you remember, a lot of the rumors early on is that, oh, he doesn't want to be a running back. That's the big hang up. He wants to be a receiver, yada, yada, yada. Well, reality is they want him to be a weapon. And so they're going to pay him as such. So if he gets X amount of touchdowns or yards rushing, he actually gets incentives, which I think is very, very smart by the 49ers and good for Deebo Samuel as well.
I agree. I think it is smart. And Kyle Shanahan talked about it today. He said he was tired about the usage comments and that Deebo Samuel never expressed a desire to not be in a running back thing. Remember, Deebo Samuel was the one who trademarked wide back on his t-shirts. That was never an issue. And I think it's very interesting because the value, 380 rushing yards, Deebo Samuel got 365 last year on with pretty much 10 games of rushing at max, 59 carries, 365 yards. Imagine that spread over a 17 game period. You don't need 5 carries a game. You might need 2 to 3, maybe 4 carries a game. And Deebo Samuel can eclipse that number, get his guaranteed money, and be done with it while also helping the 49ers win. Because Deebo just seems like a guy who wants to play. He doesn't care about the role, about the kind of like the little parts about it, the basics of it. He just wants to play and win in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, come on, we saw this man leave it all on the field. We saw him falling apart against the Titans, against the Packers, and then crying after the NFC Championship game. I mean, this guy wants to win and he wants the ball in his hands. So I think by all means necessary, he's willing to do it. You know, I personally, I like the wide back thing. I'm not going to lie, but to a certain extent, I want to dial back a little bit.
I
I want
agree.
it to be more like 2019 where he's getting into rounds and he's stretching the field horizontally versus lining up as a traditional running back and running up the A gap. Like that's where I want to see the limits, but I still want him to get his touches, you know, out on the edges. I want him to get into rounds and those types of things and jet sweeps to get up against either smaller defensive ends, some of the outside linebackers or corners and safeties. I don't want him in the middle going with those fat daddies. I think that's where the problems can come in. So we'll see how they play this.
I agree with you. I mean, when you remember those 2019 jet sweeps with Samuel that would get 13 to 15 yards, and then Brandon Ayuk replicating that role when Samuel was injured in 2020, you're surprised a little bit that the 49ers didn't go towards that. Instead, using Samuel as a regular running back and then more so screens in 2021. I'm interested to see where the 49ers go in 22. And it also was interesting to note 49ers did start implementing jet sweeps into their offensive install on Saturday. There were 2 jet sweeps to backup receivers, albeit to McLeod and to Gray, but that might be a plan for them in 2022.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, those were things that they incorporated because Jimmy really struggled to stretch the field vertically and horizontally with his arm,
Correct.
right? But the moment that you can get jet sweeps going or you can get the screen game going, at least you can spread it out horizontally, even if you can't do so vertically. Well, we know Lance can do it vertically and
Mhm.
he can do it horizontally with his arms and maybe even his legs. But then you add in the threat of Deebo Samuel out on the edges to help with that. I mean, this offense is going to be a handful.
Yeah. And I mean, the main reason to be super optimistic about Deebo Samuel and about the 49ers, more importantly, now with him being re signed, is because of quarterback Trey Lance. He's got the ability to stretch the field. That was the main reason the 49ers wanted to get the connection started. And as I mentioned earlier, you see them two throwing Trey Lance warming up to Deebo Samuel that had been a coach in the last few days. Instead, Deebo Samuel took that role, just warming up with Trey Lance, trying to get that connection in a way together. And so, quarterbacks wise, what have you seen or what have you at least heard? And what is your expectation of Trey Lance going into training camp for the remainder of practices?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not there and you are. And so I've been staying real close to some of the things that you've been saying. Obviously, Grant's my guy, so I'm there listening to him as well. But for the most part, I mean, really no surprise. I mean, sure, the kid's struggling, but I really look at it and say, okay, well, first of all, it sounds like he's getting better. It
Mhm.
sounds like, you know, again, a lot of people hear a number, 5 of 13, 5 of 10, what have you, and they get weirded out by that. They get worried about that. But reality is, it sounds like a lot of the throws are on target. There's been some drops. He's been under intense pressure, and to go against a defense that, by the way, pretty much everybody expects is going to be top 5. So if you have a top 5 defense, doesn't it also stand to reason that maybe your young quarterback might struggle against that early on, especially without an offensive line, a starting offensive line, or with a makeshift offensive line, and without his number one weapon? I mean, I think that's reasonable to expect. I also look at it and say all of these lumps early on are going to get him prepared, and I liken it to a fighter, a training camp for a fighter.
Mhm.
Fighters always say they get their butt whooped in training camp. Like, they put themselves in bad situations and bad positions on purpose so that when they get into the fight, there's nothing that surprises them. Well, that's what I look at for Trey Lance. He's going against a defense that knows exactly what's about to happen. They know what Kyle Shanahan wants to do. They know exactly how Trey Lance plays. They know where the strengths and weaknesses are of not only his game, but the players around them. And they're going for blood because they want to look good as well. But in the end, the games are going to be easier for Trey Lance than I believe these practices have been for him thus far.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think it's so important to provide context every time we talk about Trey Lance and his throwing, right? When you talk about like when you see the completion percentage, right? 6 of 14, 3 of 9, 8 of 15, and then today 5 of 11. Damn, Trey Lance sucks, right? But that's not the case. When you really dive deep into it, I'm very amazed actually so far at how Trey Lance has been able to pinpoint deep ball accuracy. It might not be a completion, but Trey Lance so far is 6 of 12 on deep passes in training camp, and 3 of those balls have been dead on the money. And that was a 35-yard ball. All 3 of them were actually on the same day, on Thursday, when the deep ball install was kind of being implemented and the 49ers really ramped it up. So if you talk about accuracy, having 75% of your deep passes being accurate and on the money, especially including the difficulty of some of those throws that Trey Lance has made, I think it's very important to know. Has he been struggling, like you said? Yeah. But to me, it's interesting because he is the exact opposite in terms of his strengths that Jimmy Garoppolo was a year ago. He has excelled with the deep ball and struggled in the intermediate range. That's where, I mean, Garoppolo did throw to linebackers, just like Lance has thrown 2 interceptions to, which has been an issue a little bit. But Garoppolo is known, obviously, for throwing in tight windows in short intermediate range, while Lance so far has thrown a couple of balls behind receivers, has thrown a couple of balls in front of receivers while going on out routes. So that is the thing. But yeah, optimism is definitely rising for Lance, especially over the last 2 practices.
Yeah, and it sounds like he's making at least one wow throw every practice, right?
Yeah.
And so he's got the wow throws down, and then he's starting to get the basics down as well. I mean, the first day of training camp, it sounds like really all he hit was the short stuff, which was great to hear. I mean, a lot of people are waiting for the big wow throws to happen, and I'm sitting here going, well, hold on, this is the best thing in the world. One of the throws that I geeked out on in the Texans game was when he broke the pocket a little bit, eluded the tackle in the pocket, moved up in the pocket, and then hit JaMychal Hasty on like a little 3-yard dump route to get the first down.
Mhm.
And to me, that showed maturity. That showed growth. Everybody was talking about the throw to Ayuk or Kittle or some of the wow throws, Deebo, but that little throw to me showed the maturity and the growth that I wanted to see. And so when I heard that day one was him taking what was given to him, that got me excited, right? Because I know he can make those big time throws. We've seen that already. I
Mhm.
want him to be consistent, dumping off and in the intermediate area. It sounds like intermediate's still a work in progress, but that will come with time as well.
And that was why I was proud of one incompletion today, a throwaway. Trey Lance faced immediate pressure on one play, rolled out to his left, saw that there wasn't a receiver open, and instead of trying to throw a 50-50 ball, he just threw it away because he couldn't get any yardage with his legs. And so that was one play. The other part of Trey Lance today, this was the first day where I really thought we saw an unleashed Trey Lance, meaning he wasn't necessarily thinking, I've got to stay in the pocket, I've got to throw the football. He started running whenever there wasn't an open play. And believe me, today, with the coverage that there was there, even with a good pocket, there wasn't many, like there were plays where nobody was open. and Lance took off for a 15-yard touchdown. He had a couple of scrambles. It's nice to see Lance not think about it and just run when he needs to run, because he's protecting the offense and also making smart decisions, which he knows he's capable of doing. It's just he's got to get comfortable and not overthink it in a way.
Yeah, I think pads will bring that out of him, because my
Definitely.
understanding of the way that training camp is ran, especially without pads, if a sack comes, they extend the play and you really don't throw the ball away. Like, you still try to make a throw even if there's nothing there, right?
Correct.
Which can mess with your numbers or interceptions or what have you. But now that pads are on, it's more like a game where you're going to see him running. You're going to see him throwing the ball away. You're going to see him handing off to a running back. Like, those things now become very, very real. And so now that pads are on, this is where I think it matters most. Like, all that other stuff was cool, but really you're just passing with jerseys and helmets on. It's not that big of a deal. This is where we're going to see really where his growth has been. And to your point, the running, Trey is pretty damn athletic. And a lot of people look at him last year and are like, well, I don't know. I didn't really see some of that athleticism. But I think a lot of that was the indecisiveness that you talked about, because when he was decisive, play one against Arizona, very decisive, edge pressure immediately. What does he do? He gets out of there, runs for a first down right away, no problem, looks extremely athletic. But then you have some of those weird plays against the Texans where he's like rolling out to his left. Should I throw? Should I not? He's kind of in between. And then he gets tagged, right? And so really it's the decision-making, deciding when to throw, when to run. All of those things do matter, but he is plenty athletic to make some things happen with his legs. It's just about the mental side, and that will come as well.
Yeah, definitely. And the one other part, you talked about the mental part. He looked faster today than I've ever seen him, really. And it's not that Lance just grew some extra pair of wheels or something. Lance today, just like you talked about, wasn't indecisive. He just moved, and really that speed, that 4.4 level speed was there today, which is exciting. And this kind of transitions me to the other part of the quarterback room, because we talk about the promise of Lance, but there's also questions about the other guys. Are you confident in a quarterback too? And do you think that actually matters for the 49ers going into 2022?
No, I'm not confident. And no, I don't think it matters. It's funny because I feel like the injuries to Jimmy Garoppolo over the years have really made this fan base worry. I've never heard a fan base talk more about the backup quarterback than the San Francisco 49er fan base. I talk to a lot of fans. I don't know who some of these backups. I don't know who Mahomes' backup is. I don't care. They don't care. Rodgers, we know love just because we know Jackson got injured last year, so we know his. But some of the Allen, who cares, right? Like, none of this stuff matters. If you lose your starting quarterback for a long period of time, you're most likely not going to win. And if you think keeping Jimmy Garoppolo is worth it on the off chance that Lance misses 2 or 3 games because we can rely on Jimmy, I don't know, man. I don't care who the backup quarterback is. It doesn't matter to me.
That's a great point there. I mean, I'm not going to say Sudfeld has looked good. He can't throw deep accurately, really, but he's a check down machine. You just need a check down machine. And moreover, it doesn't matter. I think the 49ers did a smart move. I actually thought they should keep Sudfeld earlier in the year when many were going for Taylor or going for the other guys, just because it was a cheaper route. And the 49ers seemed inclined to keep Garoppolo on the roster, at least. And you've seen how that's gone out. I don't think Garoppolo is the answer for 2022. And yeah, you nailed it there. And I think that quarterback talk, I think right now there's a clear 1 and a clear 2. Maybe some other move happens, but right now I think it's very clear who the 1 and the 2 is, and that's Lance and Sudfeld.
By the way, we've seen Shanahan make Nick Mullins look serviceable. So are we worried that if Sudfeld has to play a game or 2, I think that they can win depending on who the opponent is. I think they can be competitive for a game or 2. Now, if it's a 7-game stretch, they're done. I mean, it's over, right?
Yeah.
But if they need him for a game, I'm not going to panic about it. Like, sure, it's going to be a major downgrade. Sure, it's not going to be as good as Jimmy, but I mean, Jimmy wasn't going out and winning those games anyways. As long as Sudfeld comes in and knows what he is, which is a game manager, and does dink and dunk and just doesn't turn over the ball, the 49ers have a chance. This defense is legit. This special teams is legit. Just protect the freaking football. And as long as he can do that, they'll be fine.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think this is a good transition period because we talked about Lance, his rushing ability. We see Jan Stewart saying, you nailed it. But overall, that's been one part of the 49ers offense. But the reason Shanahan was fine with the quarterback move overall was because he has faith in the other position groups, specifically the running game, which seems like it'll improve from 2021. What are your initial thoughts on the running back group? And who do you have optimism for? And maybe who do you think doesn't necessarily make the roster overall?
Yeah, this one's tough because it seems like Shanahan likes Hasty. And to me, when I just look at the running backs, I'm like, that's the guy I'm getting rid of, right? I'm getting rid of JaMychal Hasty. But it seems like he likes Hasty. Also, Jeff Wilson Jr., I believe, didn't practice today.
He did not know.
Undisclosed injury. So, he's not doing himself any favors. Mason seems like a pretty damn good undrafted rookie free agent, and there's always one, it seems like, in a Shanahan stable of running backs. We'll see. I still believe in Sermon with Lance. I don't know why. Obviously Mitchell's the guy. I love Mitchell, but the running back room, regardless of the route they decide to take, should be much better off than it was last year. I mean, just having health there will be significant. But I cannot erase the second half against Seattle with Trey Lance in the game and Sermon next to him and how good it looked, right? And most of us thought that Sermon was brought into play with Lance. And there was some things that happened that rookie year where he scrubbed his Instagram account, threw a bit of a fit, probably expected things to be handed to him a little bit. And that just isn't the case in the NFL. And that's not the case with Shanahan.
Yeah.
I think he worked his butt off in the offseason. And I'm excited to see what he can do next to Trey Lance. So he's the one that I've got some optimism for. Obviously they drafted TDP in round 3. I was iffy about that pick, but I'm sure in a Shanahan offense, he can be good too. I feel like there's a lot of options that they can go with, but it sounds to me like Wilson's probably going to be the odd man out. They may try to sneak one of those other guys on their practice squad because I think that they do like Hasty as well, and he's kind of the third down guy. So that's the way that I see it playing out.
I think your analysis there is really good. And you talk about Sermon. Sermon today was the running back too. He was the only other running back to get snaps with Trey Lance at the quarterback. And so to me, I think Sermon honestly has looked good. I know other people have conflicting reports about Sermon. Maybe him overthinking it, him trying to utilize his cutting ability too much. I thought Sermon had a couple of nice runs today. One run immediately pops into mind. McGlinchey was at right tackle, and it was a good block between McGlinchey and Burford. Sermon was going for an outside run, had a one cut into the middle, 6-7 yard gain. And if you can just consistently get that type of production from Sermon, that's good because he's got the ability, and his cutting ability is just so fluid. It's just if he's a downhill, just looking downfield, primarily rather than trying to move a lot more horizontally, I think he's going to be set. And I think honestly, after just looking at him right now, I think he right now is a clear-cut running back 2 with TDP on his tail. And you talk about Hasty. I think at least for the first 4 practices, Hasty seemed like a guy that Shanahan and all liked. Hasty was getting run. Mason was the 6th. But today, with Wilson out, it wasn't Hasty getting a majority of RB4 reps. It was actually Jordan Mason. He had 3 catches today, including 1 physical run. What the physical run just showed to me, he's an NFL type of running back. He's a guy who will excel. And if the interior pass blocking struggles in the run game this year a little bit, you need more physical guys who can work after the first contact, like Mitchell did last year with his 2.5 yards after contact. And I think this guy here, Jordan Mason, just fits that bill. I've liked him since the 49ers picked him up. I thought he could be a dark horse, and I honestly think he could make the roster over Hasty if the 49ers, it might end up being roster politics, right? Can the 49ers believe they can keep Mason if they cut him? Can the 49ers believe they can keep Hasty if they cut him? And it might end up being that. But right now, in my opinion, Mason looks like the better running back, and Jeff Wilson Jr. has just not looked good. Even before the injury, he just hasn't looked good so far.
Yeah, it does seem like he lost that explosion, right?
Yeah,
And when he came back
exactly.
last year, I was like, man, he doesn't look near as explosive. You saw it against the Patriots, you saw it against Arizona, the year prior. He had a lot of explosion and it just seemed like it was gone. And I was thinking, okay, well, maybe this wasn't fully healthy or he just wasn't as in shape. And so the explosion wasn't there, but full off season, he should be good. If you're saying that it's still not there, I mean, it just might be over for him, right? Like this is the sad truth of running backs in the NFL, and it happens pretty dang often. So,
Yeah,
rooting for him, but it does seem like he's the odd man out for sure.
definitely. We got a couple of questions about offensive line, so we can shift on there. First one's from Quesadilla Thrilla 71. How concerned are you with the offensive line and the lack of consistent production with receivers? I'll give you the first part. How concerned are you with the offensive line?
Oh man, it's crazy because I wanted to remain optimistic, and certainly, this is something that's been talked about for months amongst 49er fans. Like, this is not anything new. Like, now a lot of people are just getting the confirmation that they were worried about, at least early on. Like, oh man, this offensive line really isn't as good as what Shanahan may have said it is. I knew it wasn't good. Why don't we sign JC Treader? Like, these are things that are being talked about on a regular basis. I'm still optimistic with it. I actually do believe in Banks. Here's where I have the issue. I assumed that Brunskill was going to start at right guard, and I was fine with that. I don't think he's a bad right guard at all.
Yeah.
I had a lot of confidence in Banks, and then it was that center position where I'm like, okay, that's the one where maybe iffy. But they are revamping the whole interior part of the offensive line. That is concerning. And they're doing a lot of mix and matching, just trying to figure things out. That's concerning because it tells me they don't necessarily know who they want to go with. And this is something that may take all training camp to figure out. And if that is the case, you're going to end up with the best players, which is fantastic. But what about the continuity? If the continuity isn't there, regardless of how good the players are, even if you got the 5 best out there, it can be a disaster early on. So that's my biggest concern. I just, they have the lottery ticket sitting there in Jimmy G, and they've had it there the whole time, right? Mm-hmm. You can get rid of Jimmy G. Sure, you're going to eat $7.5 million. Now they're not going to eat anything. He's past a physical. They can cut him tomorrow, and they're saving everything. So now you really have the lottery ticket in Jimmy G sitting right there. I just saw again today that Treader did rank number 2 in pass protection and has ranked in the top 2 for 4 straight years. I know he doesn't practice. I know he has knee issues. I know he's the head of the players union, and so maybe he's going to want to get some guaranteed money. There's some issues with that. It's not a lock that you can just go get JC Treader and that it works. But man, I do know he's an upgrade over anybody else that we've got on this roster at center. Mm-hmm. I am uncomfortable with Brunskill moving out of that right guard spot. And if this offensive line is the reason that they don't win games this year or go as far as they could, I think that would be a shame, knowing that they had the answers there all along and they chose not to go that route. That's my concern.
Yeah. I tweeted something earlier today about JC Treader, and I totally understand the statistics you just point out, right? JC Treader is one of the better centers regardless in the NFL. The one concern is the concern that you brought up about practice. When I'm looking at this offensive line, the one issue that I'm really seeing is the lack of cohesion. The interior guys specifically. It's 3 new guys, and the one thing about JC Treader, if he's not practicing, the interior guys, the guards, the young guards are trying to build a connection with the center, but the center continuously just keeps changing so that you can't really build a connection. That's where the biggest issue is, because in zone blocking, when you're reliant on the other guy, it's tough when you don't really have the other guy's tendencies down because it's continuously changing. And so that's where a lot of these 1, 0, and 2 yard plays happen today, because there's a miscommunication there. And then overall, one guy doesn't end up getting to the second level blocking Fred Warner, who comes in and makes a play on the ball after that. And to me, while JC Treader is a great player, if he isn't practicing enough, I don't know if those issues that the 49ers currently have go away. Now, does the pass protection issues go away? Yes. I think that does go away. But I wonder, do the 49ers squander enough? And this isn't me talking now personally, me just talking from the 49ers sense. I said this on a space. I feel like it's going to go one of two ways. Either the 49ers try this offensive line out, find a center, and it works out, and then them three start working together, or the 49ers keep trying the center battle, and then by the time they realize it doesn't work out, it's too late for them to try something new, because this relationship with Trey Lance is so important, because not only does he have to understand how the center calls protections, he has to understand how the center pass blocks. I was talking to Brad Graham today. He talked about how Brunskill blocks completely different, because Brunskill lets the first 2 yards go and then anchors, so it's a deeper stance. Whereas Brendel, from what I personally saw today, he doesn't do that. He stands up from the center point specifically. If a guy gets by him, but he blocks straight up. So it's a complete difference from the center position. And for Trey Lance to experience a third change so late in the preseason, that's the one worry that I have. So it's not that I think if you sign JC Treader now, like tomorrow, have him out in practice for the next 10 days, you might be able to figure it out, but I don't think that that's realistic, which is why I don't think the 49ers should go out and sign Treader when it's done.
Yeah, and that's the thing, though, right? Is like the JC Treader thing has been there for months.
Yeah.
Like as soon as Mac retired, you had an option there that you could have gotten, right?
Yeah.
And again, if the continuity is going to be off because they can't figure it out anyways, well, I would feel a lot more comfortable with the continuity being off and having a Pro Bowl caliber center, at least a veteran, a guy that can make sure that the protections are on point no matter what. He knows what he's seeing, especially in this scheme, to where I think things would get figured out throughout a few games. And luckily for the 49ers, they do start off light on the schedule, so it gives them time either way, whichever route they decide to go, it does give them time to work through some of these things. I just want the most talented guys out there, and I cannot get this quote out of my mind, but Shanahan, when Mac retired, said that is the heartbeat of our offense, the center position. Well, if the center position is the heartbeat of your offense, why have you played musical chairs at this position the whole time you've been here? That is a little interesting to me.
Let me just ask you a hypothetical. Would you talked about it a little earlier about the right guard battle potentially and not a center battle. Would you have been more comfortable going into this offseason knowing that Brendel was the center and then having a battle at right guard? You would have been more comfortable?
Yeah. Oh, 100. What? Actually, you know what? No. I would have been more comfortable knowing that Brunskill was the starter at right guard. And then from there, Brendel, West, whoever, they can figure that out. Maybe West over time can overtake him just because he's more talented, whatever. But the less movement, the better, right? Like, correct. I understand. 100%. Okay, so we got our left tackle, we got our right tackle. You put Brunskill at right guard, that's 3 or 5 positions. Okay, so you got to redo the left guard and you got to redo the center. We knew that going in. I don't think many of us expected that right guard would also be up in the air, and it's up in the air without Brunskill even being a part of the battle, which is interesting to me. Unless I'm mistaken, I feel like he's been taking his snaps at center.
There has been no competition at right guard. Nobody. Moore was the guy in OTAs. Brunskill potentially. Neither of them have taken snaps. It's been Zakel, who was relegated to third team.
Yep.
Sutherland, who's not making the team, and then Colton McKivitz for very minority of reps, who took majority of time at both tackle positions.
Okay, so I mean, you know what I mean? So Brunskill, who we all slated in as the right guard, is not even competing at this position. That's weird to me. Like that's a lot of reworking to do in one off season. Talk about continuity. That's going to throw everything off.
Yeah. And one other thing before I bring up our next question, the offensive line, just from the eye test, it looks way better, obviously, when you have your starters in. I thought the offensive line looked pretty solid actually today with the starters in. And I'm talking from a pass protection standpoint. There were a couple of times where Trey had a clean pocket. The issue, like I said, sometimes there's one guy of the 5 who gets beat, and that causes some disruption. It's then the consistency where you need all 5 guys to have a good rep. But there were times McGlinchey and Williams were awesome today. McGlinchey had a nice bounce back day against Nick Bosa after being mauled on Saturday. He gave up only one pressure on, I think it was 3 or 4 reps, and held down on the other couple of reps. And then the only issue right now is they're playing in such limited time that they don't even have, like, the guards don't even have cohesion with the tackles. And so it's not only movement alongside the interior, there's movement on the exterior too, because they haven't been implemented into full with the first team offensive line.
So if you had to guess right now, who do you think the starting 5 is on the offensive line?
I think just based on what I'm seeing and what the 49ers want to do, I think they want Brunskill at center. There's a reason they've had him work with Lance. They ramped up the majority of his reps. Like, I originally came into camp thinking it was Brendel. Then Saturday, they ramped up Brunskill's reps, gave Brendel the start, but Brunskill took probably 70% of the snaps at center. And then he was working with Trey after, but then it's confusing because today it was a 50-50 even split according to the eye test. So I don't really know. I personally think Brunskill will end up starting. That's how the 49ers want it to be. So I think it'd be Williams, Banks, Brunskill, Burford, McGlinchey.
Golly, man. I mean, okay, so I don't know, man. Like, that's that whole thing just blows my mind. It really does, because they've just completely gone against what everybody thought. I mean, like you said, do you think Brunskill right now is a better right guard than what they've been throwing out there so far? Just in your opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think he's a better right guard than he is center?
Yes. But I think you can't do it now. You can't put him back at right guard.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
it's
just
issue. A weird approach. Like, what?
Yeah.
Why? Like, what the? I feel like, you know what? I'm gonna DM Jordan. I'm gonna DM Grant, and I need those answers. Somebody needs to ask that, because I haven't heard it. Like, why? What is the mindset that went into remaking the whole interior offensive line when really you only had to remake 2 parts? What was the reasoning there?
The thing is, like, not only are you doing that, you're showing such a lack of confidence in Brendel, that you're starting a guy who didn't get any of the first team reps in OTA or minicamp. He hasn't started at all at right guard. He was a 4th round pick, and you're just starting him without any competition. You think that he automatically is better than Brendel, who you would place so much confidence in during the OTA and minicamp period, who did start with the first team. So that's the one question that I have. What has been the vision? And I do think Brunskill is better. Burford has higher potential, obviously, and probably can be better in the run game with a little bit of a refinement. I think he could be, just because he's a better athlete and he moves better, right, alongside with McGlinchey. But you had continuity there. I personally, it's an interesting question, and yeah, we'll see how this battle ends up, because I don't think you can end up just saying, oh, if Brunskill loses that battle, you can just throw him back at right guard, because now McGlinchey and Brendel have been playing this entire time with a different right guard there, who is completely different athletically to Daniel Brunskill.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole the whole thing's a rework, and that's not at all what we expected. And that, again, the 49ers early on are really playing into a lot of the fans' worries in the offseason.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the one worry, the one conversation, O-line, 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 O-line. And the 49ers aren't doing themselves any favors on saving face. Now, maybe they do know best. Maybe things are going to be great. Maybe by the time they get into week 1, really through the first 2 weeks, they get those wins out of the way, and then they're off and rocking. Maybe that's the case, but man, reworking all 3 spots on the interior, that I don't have confidence in that plan. I really don't.
Mm-hmm. I have a little more confidence just because of what I saw with the limited first team reps. I think it can work, but right now the switching of center is the big question, and that kind of leads us into this question where they asked Flav asked here about the O-line being significantly worse, and then talking about Trey's release time and 3rd down conversion rate. What do you think about that? Like, the combination of things, and are you concerned with the combination of Trey taking one of the longer times to throw the ball, as well as the offensive line being worse?
Yeah, that, from Trey's aspect, that's never worried me. It really hasn't. A lot of people talk about it, but he can buy time. Like, he can protect himself, right? But you do need an offensive line to be able to do that. Like, you can't just be getting rushed immediately every single time you drop back. I mean, you can only protect yourself so much. Trey Lance has shown that when he works in the pocket, if he's evading pressure, he keeps his eyes downfield. Like, we talked about the hesitation when it comes to running. A lot of that is because he's trying to throw, and so he's keeping his eyes downfield. And most of the time, he does throw before he crosses the line of scrimmage as he's approaching it. And so certainly the time to throw is going to be very high because of that. But that number is penalized when you've got a quarterback who can get mobile, can protect himself, and keeps his eyes downfield. So, I'm not worried about that aspect. The offensive line, I certainly am worried about. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Trey has shown it, right? I mean, the reason these offensive line things are popping up is because during the struggles, we've seen what's happened, and Trey has avoided pressure. I mean, he's consistently done that. There have been sacks, but they were like I didn't see many sacks today. I saw a lot more during the OTA period when sacks just don't matter because you can extend the play. Today, I didn't see that many sacks, so I'm not too worried.
I have a
Yeah.
question for you. So, and maybe this hasn't shown up a lot, but I'm curious to see who the best blocker is out of these running backs. That right there might play a big, big factor in who gets a lot more run than maybe what we're expecting. And so when we talk about the running backs and we pair that with the offensive line, who can pick up blocks the best and blitzes the best? Because that is going to be massive this season.
Yeah, so that is definitely something to watch. It didn't pop up much today. The running backs were either in two roles. They were running the football today, they were in play action and moving out for a catch, or they were just straight going through a route, either with like from the backfield or out in space. So it wasn't much today, but that is a very good point. Because one thing we've heard during the pre-draft process, Tyree and Davis Price, that's one of his strong suits. He seems like he could be that guy, that third down back. But the issue is Davis Price isn't really known for his receiving. Jordan Mason is, though, and that's where I'm very intrigued. Can he block? Because he's strong, he's physical. Does he have the technique, though, to block? And so as camp prolongs, as the entire install gets through, I want to see who that guy is.
Why not just turn Juszczyk into the third down
That
back?
could be the guy. Yeah, that could be the guy. And one interesting thing that I really haven't mentioned, because I haven't mentioned Juszczyk's name really at all, he's been getting some work out of the slot. Been pretty cool. He's been getting some work out of the slot with the first team.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. That's the thing with this team. There's so many things that they can do. I mean, so many lineups and looks and personnel groupings. Again, the offensive line is a big thing because if you don't have an offensive line, none of the other stuff matters. But if they can figure that out and at least be serviceable, man, the looks and packages they can throw out there can be extremely confusing for opposing defenses.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we talked about a lot of this, right? The offensive side and the offensive line, obviously. But the reason that the offensive line has struggled in a way is because of the defensive line, which has done pretty well. There are some injuries, unfortunately, along the defensive line. What are your just initial thoughts based on what you've heard?
Man, I gotta say, I mean, it's as good as advertised, right? Like, the injuries suck, but for the most part, Hurst is not a huge loss. It just isn't, I mean, he wasn't a guy that we were really even guaranteeing would make the team. And so it sucks for him, but as far as the depth on the defensive line, it really didn't hurt it much. The defensive line is absolutely incredible. I love that Jackson came in a little bit slimmer than what he showed early on in OTAs. And I was watching some of the drills that have been posted. That kid has some bend, like
He is
big time bend. It's crazy. And you heard the other players talk about it, but now you're really seeing it. The kid is sky's the limit. This defensive line is absolutely nasty, and I cannot wait to see the crazy lineups that they're going to throw at people. Early on, I talked about a Minahu that I felt like he could be the guy on third downs that could kick inside. Sounds
yeah,
like we're seeing that a little bit. He
yeah.
just has the frame for it. He's
Mhm.
built for it. But man, this defensive line is nasty, and I'm excited for it.
Definitely. And I agree with what you said. defensive line, you talked about Mo Hurst. I mean, he was playing pretty well in camp initially, but again, he's a backup, right? He is the fourth string defensive tackle behind Armstead, Kinlaw, and Kevin Gibbons. Meanwhile, with Armstead out and Gibbons having, or sorry, and with Kinlaw having a rest day today, but even with Kinlaw, Kevin Gibbons has been looking good. He's a guy who has initially been on the uptrend. He might even see some significant rests as a pass rusher. He's had a couple of sacks so far throughout training camp. But you talked about Drake Jackson, my standout of the day. He had 3 pressures, 1 sack. He's just been looking good. And I don't know if the 49ers can hold off too much in the regular season. I think they just got to throw him in, because at some point you got to throw your 4 best players in, regardless of where they're lined up. I know the 49ers want Jackson to be a pure edge rusher, but they might even just throw him inside. Omenihu has seen first team reps opposite of Nick Bosa at times. Today was one of those days. He got first team reps in team drills, and Omenihu has the ability to kick inside. So right now, I think honestly the 4 best pass rushers so far have been on the roster are Omenihu, Armstead, Bosa, and Jackson. If you have those 4 at like in some arrangement, that's just crazy, because you can't double team really.
Absolutely. And I know that this is a touchy subject, and so I hate to do it here. Probably should be something I do on my channel, but I'm going to talk about it because we're talking about defensive line. Listen, Kinlaw getting a rest day after a day off. Nobody wants to talk about it because of the situations that happen in the offseason, but I mean, come on, at what point, right? Like, does this become a thing? And I'm rooting for him. I really am. And I think, first of all, it looks like he's in incredible shape. Like, the guy looks amazing. Like, he looks the part. I believe he does have the talent. But here's my biggest concern. He was drafted during a COVID year. That wasn't a real offseason, right? And we heard Ayuk and Shanahan talk about just that, and how Ayuk coming into a second training camp expecting that that's what an offseason was, and it wasn't that at all. And so that's really kind of what got him in the quote-unquote doghouse. So then his second training camp and offseason for Kinlaw, he's not practicing. His knee swelled up on him, remember? So he couldn't practice really. So he's been in the league for 3 years. He didn't have a training camp his first year. He didn't have a training camp his second year. They took it easy to start so far this training camp. He really hasn't done anything. And now day 1 of pads, he's already resting off of a rest day. Like, that's concerning. And not even from, he's injured and he can't play. That's not what I'm trying to say. But from a development standpoint, like, if your only development is playing games and you're in year 3, I don't know, man. That just doesn't bode well for a guy trying to get his career on track, in my opinion.
Right. And I mean, Kinlaw didn't look like he was slowing down at all on Saturday, right? That was the thing. He was in team drills and he had some really nice reps. Like the first play of the day, pushed away Jake Brendel, picked up on an Aaron Banks trying to recover after Brendel got pushed, and then literally just bull rushed him through. And Trey Lance had to make a quick throw, which was a good throw. But like, you see the talent there. It's just you want it on the field. That's the main thing, because Kinlaw is that guy. You can understand after especially seeing him in person, you understand how the potential that Kinlaw can have, especially if he can really show some pass rush acumen over the next couple of days. That's a thing. But like you said, today's a rest day after yesterday was an off day. Even if he didn't practice in scrimmage today, I'd be fine. But having him out there is important. Just having him in the install, having him serve alongside different defensive linemen to see different packages and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and again, I'm not saying he chose to not practice. I mean, I'm sure this was a team decision.
Probably.
And I'm not trying to say that he's even hurt, right? Like, I'm just saying, like, this is crucial developmental time. And it's not fair that this kid really is going into this year with a lot to prove and a lot to figure out, and really maybe the future of his career on the line, right? As far as like how people label him and view him and what he's going to be worth if he ever does hit the open market and those types of things. I always say that players deserve 3 years because that's the grace period that you really need to fully know who a player is. Now, you may think you have the answers early on, and a lot of times you probably do. But I think most players deserve 3 full years. And especially in Kinlaw's case, I think this is a great example of it. But man, like going into year 3 and trying to get that figured out and not getting this work right now, I just think it's crucial. I think it's unfair regardless of the reasons.
Yeah, and the one thing is also, it's like he has an even more amount of pressure on him after the injuries because Ark Armstead is out for a couple of weeks, meaning, I mean, obviously it's practice, but you want your guy there, especially after the lack of depth that they have right now, or lack of top tier players that are going to play on that defensive line. Ark Armstead's out, and then Kinlaw's pretty much Kinlaw's like not replacement, but like in a way, I don't know what the word is. It's like Kinlaw's like essentially the injury. If Kinlaw gets injured, there's that guy. That's
the guy he's competing for snaps with. Let's call it what it is.
Yeah, the guy he's competing for snaps with is Kevin Gibbons there, and then Hassan Ridgeway too. Hassan Ridgeway is now out for 4 weeks. So if Kinlaw goes out, who's that guy that really mans the middle? That's the real big question. Because, I mean, Kevin Gibbons has looked good, but everybody else on the interior has not really looked good. And I'm talking about Kerry Hyder specifically. He hasn't really recorded a single, like he hasn't recorded pressures yet. You might put Omenihu there, but this is the on run stopping downs. What's your thing? Because Omenihu is more of a pass rusher. I've yet to seen him in a more so traditional run block or run stopping thing. And so are you going to throw Robert Nikomdiche out there after just signing him last week? It's a question like that. And so Kinlaw right now is even more valuable to the team than he was literally 2 weeks ago. And I think that it's important, it's imperative for him to just get acclimated with the first team defense after, missing a good amount of practice last year. I understand taking it slow. I think that is important for the 49ers, just so you don't re-aggravate something coming off such an important injury, but also you do want him on the field.
I mean, McGlinchey's coming off a pretty significant injury. It sounds like he was full go today, right? And he looked good today. Like they pitch counted him, had a day off, and then he was a go.
Yeah.
Kinlaw was pitch counted, had a day off, didn't practice. And again, like I see the comments like BMAC, you're saying, oh, overreaction. Again, I'm not trying to sell you on the fact that Kinlaw's re-hurt his knee or he's injured or whatever. My thoughts are well documented, and what I think is going on doesn't mean I'm right. That being said, I'm just saying for the progression of the player, let's assume 100% health here. Let's assume that everything he said in the offseason is true. There's no arthritis, anything like that. He's good. He's healthy, right? He looks healthy. That's the number one thing. The team says he's healthy. That's awesome. But at some point, when you're in year 3 and you've had no time to develop as a player, and your only developmental time is game day on Sunday, like that's going to hurt you no matter how talented you are. And that's my concern. It's not, oh my God, Kinlaw's hurt, let's run with that. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying the kid needs time to develop. This is that time to develop. How worried would you be if Trey Lance was missing practices at this time?
Arm fatigue,
not developing.
Arm fatigue. Where it at?
Right, he had arm fatigue. Whatever. Even if he's healthy, like my point is that these players need time to develop, and he didn't get it in year 1. He didn't get it in year 2, and to start year 3, he's not getting it. That's where my concern is. It's not he's injured or he's going to miss time. It's just to get the best out of Kinlaw and for Kinlaw to get the best out of himself. This is crucial moments right now, in my opinion, that he's missing.
I agree. Overall, I'm optimistic about Kinlaw. I still think that, if what he said is true, if he's healthy and if he's moving the way he's moved so far, the 49ers are going to be in good shape. And one area really that's going to benefit from a guy like Kinlaw and this defensive line really working like they are is the secondary, and we've seen it so far. Like, we obviously have heard about Charvarius Ward, but what's one surprise about the secondary that you've heard, and what's one kind of thing that you, in a way, maybe want to overreact to?
Oh, man. I mean, let's overreact to God. This could be the best secondary this team has had since the mid-90s, since Deion Sanders was on this roster. I mean, dude, the amount of interceptions that this secondary is pulling.
11.
It's
11.
insane. And you're paired with a defensive line that is absolutely going to get after the quarterback. This might be the best pairing of defensive line and secondary in the whole NFL. That's my overreaction, right?
Mhm.
And that's a great overreaction. Surprise a little bit, Darqueze Dennard, it seems like, is getting some of those or a majority of the nickel snaps.
Yeah.
I thought Womack would be the guy, right? Maybe I'm off on that, but those are the things that we're hearing. So, I'm interested to see how that plays out. And one thing that I did hear, and this is something that I've said for a while now, is that last year, I really thought the plan was, if Verrett could stay healthy, a lot more cover one, a lot more man coverage, right? Obviously, that got derailed immediately,
Yeah.
and they had to go back to more traditional zone defense.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people are worried about Hufanga in a too high shell. That's not necessarily the best place for him. I agree with that. Like, he's probably not as good as Tart in those areas. However, where he is good is when he's able to shift down and get into the box and play with his instincts. And I think the 49ers are set up to put him in successful spots because they are going to play a lot more cover one and even some cover zero. And so that's going to be able to move him down so that he's not playing a ton of too high, and he's going to be in a spot where he can be successful. And that is exciting to me. And they have the corners finally that can actually get this done, and they can deploy this. And if Ferret is healthy, even if they have an injury, they still can deploy it. So it's a much different spot than what they've been in. They can be very aggressive at the line of scrimmage with the talent that they have, with the skill set that they have, and knowing that they have a defensive line that's going to protect him if something gets blown anyways. This could be a scary secondary.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with you. You talk about Hufanga. Initially, Hufanga has looked good. Like Hufanga has proved to me so far that he can start for the 49ers. And you talk about the cover scheme. Cover one, I think, is going to be something you've seen. We see a lot of single high so far. We've seen cover two looks, but we've also seen a lot of single high. And like you talk about Hufanga and his instincts, right? Hufanga, like when you see his short-term speed, I understand he does have trouble with deep range speed and covering deep, but his short-term burst is actually a lot better than I expected. I definitely anticipate him seeing a lot more snaps in that type of role because getting him and his instincts and that speed in the short term, getting to the line of scrimmage, I think won't be a problem for Hufanga. And something I saw today, those guys in that middle row, when you have runs, be it up the middle or be it outside, the defensive line does such a good job of clogging the offensive line that the linebackers can just shoot into the gaps and make plays. Fred Warner is elite at doing that because of how he just sees plays and has great vision. And I think Hufanga can be the next guy to do something in that similar role because with his instincts, he can visualize how the play is going. As for other players, I mean, we talk about Ward, we talk about Mosley, but it's amazing because you finally get to be aggressive. You finally get to be that defense that you wanted to be last year with two guys up in receivers' faces in press man with a defensive line that is smothering and get to a quarterback in 2.5 seconds. And then safeties over the top with Jimmy Ward, who can play a versatile amount of roles and play them to a high extent. So I am very excited about this secondary. The interceptions are great so far. And really, the reason that I'm more optimistic about the interceptions and why they might translate, the names that you heard last year with the interceptions, those aren't the names. The names that you heard last year not getting interceptions, those same people aren't necessarily getting interceptions. Like, respectfully to Emmanuel Mosley, he hasn't gotten a pick this in this entire period, right? And he's a guy who's great at PBUs, just doesn't get interceptions. But Charvarius Ward, on the other hand, has gotten a ton of picks. You see Fred Warner over the middle getting picks, and you expect him to get 1 to 2 a year. And then Charvarius Moore got 2 picks, and that was the upside in a way of his game before. He isn't a great run defender, but him in coverage and potentially being a ball hawk like he was in college, that might be an added benefit. So overall, I expect the turnover rate on defense to go up.
Well, I remember too, one of my bold predictions going into the season last year is that Fred Warner was going to be Defensive Player of the Year. And the
Mhm.
reason that I said that is because I felt like they were going to play a lot of cover one and they were going to play a lot of man. That was the plan. And that he would be able to get free, like you're saying, make big plays in the backfield, be able to roam the middle and make plays that way. And it just never materialized because the defense went back to what it was with Saleh and Richard Sherman and some of those guys being there. This gives me a lot of confidence. Like all pro Fred Warner should be alive and well all season long if this is the defense they get to run. B Mac, I just want to say, I love you, man. I just get super passionate. So that's, I just that was where that was coming from. But I'm not trying to call you out specifically. But maybe Rohan, you can answer a question because it seems like him and Swan are having a conversation.
Go for it.
I thought McGlinchey and Kinlaw practiced for the first time together on the same day. Am I mistaken about that? Okay.
You're right. You're right. They all were they were all on the field on Wednesday, but not team drills. And then McGlinchey, Kinlaw, and who was the third guy that got injured? Or no, maybe it was just them two. McGlinchey and Kinlaw both practiced team drills and practiced in scrimmage on Saturday, first day for both of them.
Okay. All right.
And then Kinlaw didn't practice obviously today. McGlinchey, Kinlaw, and Williams were all on Saturday. McGlinchey and Williams both were limited in a way today on that pitch count.
All right. Yeah. Interested. Okay.
All right. But yeah, that's pretty much it for so far, day one of training camp. Thank you so much, Jessie, for tuning in. And real quick before we go, plug your channel, which is also in the description, and plug your Twitter and where people can find you.
Yeah, for sure. Last Second Sports is the channel. And then at JNay, that's JNAY_LSS. You see it right there on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
That is my Twitter handle. Definitely tap in, follow there. Usually go a few times a week, do a call-in show and whatnot. So yeah, tap in. It's a lot of fun.
100%, always great. And one of the pillars of the community always gets involved with the people. Thank you for what you do, Jessie. And thank you for coming on the show today. Great show. For those of you that are just coming in, be sure to just tune in, see the early parts and see what happened with training camp today. I posted a video earlier today. As for those asking about training camp, there is practice tomorrow, practice Wednesday, and Thursday is the rest day for the week. So be sure to be on the lookout for my content tomorrow after we come back from training camp. But thank you guys so much for popping in the chat. Thank you, Jessie, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Let me say one thing if you haven't ended it yet.
Go for it.
If you're tapping in with Rohan and you have not subscribed, make sure you do so. The kid is on the come up. He's doing a fantastic job. He's given a lot of us info on what's going on in training camp, and he reports very, very fair. I want to give you a lot of credit, Rohan. You're young, but you really got your stuff together. You're very mature, and I love your style of how you're reporting on things. I feel like I'm getting, all the players are getting a fair shake from you, and you're just calling it how you see it. I like that you went against the grain today. You talked about how Trey had 2 passing touchdowns. You explained why when a lot of people were reporting 1. Doesn't mean they were wrong or you were right or whatever, but I like that you're willing to stand on what you believe you saw. And I think it's great to see in somebody else coming into the community with a different perspective. I love it. So make sure that you are tapping in. Rohan's doing this every day after training camp. He's doing a fantastic job. And make sure that you like and subscribe if you have not done so already.
Thank you so much, Jessie. And that is a great way to end today's show. And guys, be sure also to tap into his channel. And we'll be back tomorrow with another stream.